Mama, one day I promise the light I study under won't just be borrowed from the street. It'll be mine. 20-year-old Willa Hartman whispered those words into the pre-dawn darkness of their weathered farmhouse, careful not to wake her sleeping parents. Her mother, Constance, stirred anyway, a mother's ears never truly sleep, and watched through half-closed lids as her daughter gathered her worn textbooks, wrapping them carefully in a faded cotton cloth. Willa's hands moved with such tenderness, as if those books were made of something more precious than paper. And perhaps for her they were. The Hartman farm sat on the outskirts of Millbrook, a forgotten corner of rural Kentucky, where opportunities arrived as rarely as rain in August. Their land was tired, yielding just enough to keep hunger at bay, but never enough to dream beyond survival. Willa's father, Thomas, worked dawn to dusk, coaxing life from stubborn soil, his hands perpetually stained with earth and regret. He'd once had dreams, too, of becoming a teacher, but his own father's death had pulled him from school at 15, chaining him to land that felt more like a sentence than an inheritance. Constance rose silently, wrapping a shawl around her thin shoulders. She found Willa on the porch, lacing her boots by the pale light of a kerosene lamp. "Baby girl," she said softly, "you've been studying till midnight under that streetlight for 3 years now. Your eyes, they're getting so tired." Willa looked up, and in the lamplight her mother saw something that made her chest ache. Determination bright as fever, burning alongside exhaustion that settled deep in the bones. "I'm close, Mama. Dr. Peterson said if I aced the scholarship exam next month, I could get into the state university. Full ride, everything paid." Constance knelt beside her daughter, cupping that beautiful, stubborn face. "And what if it doesn't happen? Then what?" "Then I study harder." Willa's voice cracked just slightly. "Because what else is there? This can't be all there is, Mama. It can't be." What Constance couldn't tell her daughter, what she'd kept locked in her heart like a secret wound, was that she understood that hunger more than Willa knew. Before marriage, before the farm claimed her too, Constance had been accepted to nursing school in Louisville. But her own mother had fallen ill, and duty had called louder than dreams. She'd stayed. Her mother had recovered. The acceptance letter had expired. And somehow 30 years had passed, each day bleeding into the next, until her own aspirations became ghosts she no longer had the strength to chase. She wouldn't let that happen to Willa. She couldn't. "Then you study," Constance whispered fiercely, pulling her daughter close. "You study until the whole world has no choice but to see you." Every evening after her farm chores, Willa walked 2 miles to where Miller Road met Route 44, where a single streetlight cast a cone of amber light onto the cracked pavement. She'd spread her books there, sitting on an overturned crate, working through calculus and chemistry, literature and history. Neighbors drove past, some honking in mockery, others shaking their heads at the foolishness of ambition in a girl who should know better than to want more than Millbrook offered. But there was one neighbor who didn't pass by. Gareth Morrison was 73, a widower who lived in the small house adjacent to that streetlight. A retired electrician, he'd spent his career fixing what was broken, but never quite managed to repair the loneliness that settled in after his wife Pauline's death. Most evenings he sat on his porch, invisible in the darkness, watching this young woman hunched over her books with an intensity that reminded him of Pauline, who'd taught herself to read at 40, devouring every book in the county library before her heart quietly gave out at 61. One October night, as the first frost crept across the ground, Gareth noticed Willa's hands trembling as she tried to write. He watched her blow on her fingers, tuck them under her arms, then determinedly return to her work. Something inside him, something that had been dormant for the 6 years since Pauline's passing, stirred awake. The next evening, Willa arrived to find a small camp chair positioned under the streetlight, a thermos sitting on it with a note in shaky handwriting. "For cold nights and warm futures, a friend."
She looked around, seeing only darkness and the distant glow of Gareth's porch. Her throat tightened. She'd grown so accustomed to mockery that kindness felt almost dangerous, like something that might break her if she let herself believe in it. But the coffee was hot and her fingers were cold, and sometimes grace arrives exactly when cynicism tries to convince us we don't deserve it. This became their unspoken ritual. Gareth never approached, never intruded, but each night there were small offerings: the chair, the coffee, eventually a battery-powered lamp when the streetlight flickered unreliably. And one evening, tucked under the thermos, Willa found a check for $500 with a note in shaky handwriting: "For the exam registration and whatever else you need. This isn't charity, it's an investment in someone who refuses to quit. Pay it forward someday." Willa's hands shook as she read it. $500, her family's entire monthly income. She walked to Gareth's porch, tears streaming, and knocked. When he opened the door, she could barely speak. I can't accept this. It's too much. You don't even know me." Gareth smiled, his weathered face crinkling with warmth. "I know enough. I know you've studied under that streetlight every night for 3 years. I know you don't quit when it rains, when it's cold, when people laugh. I know you remind me of my Pauline." His voice caught. "And I know that when you have the chance to help someone reach for something beautiful, you take it. Otherwise, what's the point of anything?" Why would you do this for a stranger?" "Because someone did it for Pauline once. A librarian paid for her first reading glasses when we couldn't afford them. Said she could see Pauline's hunger for words, and hunger like that deserved to be fed." He pressed the check back into her hands. "Take it. Make my Pauline proud. Make yourself proud." That night, Willa studied harder than she ever had, powered not just by her own determination, but by the weight of kindness received, of being seen and believed in by someone with no obligation except his own generous heart. But 3 weeks before the exam, Thomas collapsed in the field. A minor stroke, the doctor said, but he needed rest, medication they couldn't afford, and absolutely no physical labor for months. The harvest sat unfinished, bills piled like autumn leaves, and Willa faced an impossible choice: use Gareth's money for her exam or use it to keep her family afloat. She sat under the streetlight that night, not studying, just staring at her books. Constance found her there at midnight, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Baby girl, what is it?" "I can't do it, Mama. I can't take that exam. We need the money for Daddy's medicine, for the bills. I thought I could be selfish just this once, but I can't. I can't choose my dreams over keeping Daddy alive." Constance lowered herself to the pavement beside her daughter, her own eyes bright with tears. And then she did something she'd never done. She told Willa about nursing school, about the acceptance letter, about choosing duty over dreams, and spending 30 years wondering what if. "I don't regret staying for my mother," Constance said carefully, "but I regret that I never tried again. I regret that I let one door convince me all doors were locked." She gripped Willa's hands. "Your daddy would never forgive himself if you gave up your chance for him, and neither would I." "But the money—"
"We'll figure it out. We always do." Constance's voice turned fierce. "You take that exam. You take it and you show them what studying under streetlights for 3 years builds. You show them that where you start doesn't determine where you finish." The night before the exam, Willa sat under her streetlight one final time, and Gareth finally crossed the distance between his porch and her pool of light. He carried something wrapped in cloth, a book, old and precious. "This was Pauline's," he said, settling beside her on the pavement with a groan. "Her first book after she learned to read. Jane Eyre. She loved that line about how women feel just as men feel, need exercise for their faculties just as men do." He pressed it into Willa's hands. "I want you to have it. For luck.
for remembering that the world is full of people who'll tell you to know your place, and your job is to prove that your place is wherever your courage takes you. Willa clutched the book to her chest. "Mr. Morrison, I don't know how to thank you." "Pass your exam. Live a life big enough for both you and Pauline. That's thanks enough." 3 months later, the acceptance letter arrived. Full scholarship to the State University, major in biomedical engineering. Willa stood in her kitchen, reading it aloud to her parents, while Thomas wept openly and Constance pressed trembling hands to her mouth. But Willa knew she couldn't leave without doing one thing first. She'd been working double shifts at the diner since her father's recovery began, saving every penny. When she had enough, she went to the community college and paid for Constance to enroll in the part-time nursing program. "It's not too late, Mama," she said, watching her mother's face transform with shock and longing. "It's never too late to open a door you thought was locked forever." 4 years passed. Willa graduated top of her class and took a position designing prosthetic limbs for veterans, work that married her love of science with her deep understanding of what it means to fight for dignity when the world tries to take it from you. She returned to Millbrook on a crisp autumn evening, parking near that old streetlight on Miller Road. Gareth still lived in his small house, though he moved slower now, his hands shakier. She knocked on his door, and when he opened it, his face lit with recognition and joy. "I heard you did it," he said, pulling her into a hug. "Pauline would have been so proud." "I did it because you made it possible. You and Mama and everyone who refused to let me quit." She handed him an envelope. "This is $5,000, 10 times what you gave me, not as repayment, but as the beginning of the Pauline Morrison Scholarship Fund for other kids studying under streetlights, waiting for someone to believe in them." Gareth's eyes filled with tears. "She would have loved that. She would have loved you." They stood together under that streetlight, and Willa looked up at the amber glow that had been her classroom, her sanctuary, her launching pad to a future that once seemed impossibly distant. "You know what I learned under this light?" she said softly. "That knowledge isn't just facts and formulas. It's believing that you deserve more than what you were handed. It's people like you proving that kindness isn't weakness, it's the strongest force there is. And it's understanding that when we lift each other up, we all rise together." Gareth smiled, squeezing her hand. "And now you're the light for someone else." "Now I'm the light for someone else," echoed Willa. "Because that's how it works, the beautiful, unbreakable chain of human kindness. One person sees another struggling in the darkness and decides to share their light, not because they have to, but because they remember what darkness feels like, and they know that we're not meant to endure it alone." Willa learned her most important lesson not from textbooks, but from a lonely widower who proved that our greatest legacy isn't what we achieve for ourselves, it's what we make possible for others.
If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.